Okay, let's go over the distance self-check problems to make sure you know what you're doing here. So finding the exact distance between these two. Exact means I'm not going to touch my calculator to get a decimal in the end. I'm going to leave it in that square root or radical form. But before then, let's see what we need to do. Grab my pen here. You know that I do Pythagorean theorem stuff for this, so I'm doing my a squared plus b squared equals c squared type stuff. And one of these is distance between the x values. Went from -5 to -1. And that, if you count blocks, is a distance of 4. I'm not concerned about positive or negative because, let's face it, when I square it, it would take that off anyway. Distance between my y values here from -2 up to +7. Think of a number line, think of a thermometer. That's going to be 9 steps. So 9 squared here equals, I can leave it as c squared or I can change it to d for distance or whatever. Most people are just leaving it as c squared. I'll go with that. And so I have 16. Remember, you have to do the exponents first, plus the 81 equals my c squared. And 16 plus 81 is 97, still c squared. So to take care of that and make it just c or d or whatever you called it, we have to do the square root. So the correct answer for that one is square root of 97. I know it was a little tricky to type it out. That's why I gave instructions on that. You won't have that problem on the real thing. Okay. All right, for the second one, let me pull down a little bit there. Distance between these two. This one says to the nearest tenth, so I will need to round. Same process, though. I'm going to start with my a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And you'll notice that even though I've been doing these problems for a very, very, very long time, many years, I still write that down to begin with, to just kind of focus myself. I'm doing Pythagorean theorem. I'm imagining that triangle where this is the change in x and this is the change in y, even though I'm not drawing it out every time. So change in x went from 4 up to 7, and that's a difference of 3. We went 3 blocks there, distance. And change in y, -2 up to +3, that's 5 steps. That's going to be 9 plus my 25. And that will be 34. I do need to take the square root of that to get c by itself, but also it says round to the nearest tenth. And so when I grab my calculator and I type in square root of 34, can you see that? I get a big old decimal all the way across the screen. Well, nearest tenth, that's 1 decimal place. So I take a look at that and I see an 8 in the tenths place, but I have to take a peek next door and say, oh, what's that number going to do to it? So right now, I'll just write it off to the side here. If you can't see the calculator screen, it's 5.8309. It keeps going. There's my tenths place. So I take a peek next door. The 3 says, nope, keep it an 8. It's going to stay. So 5.8 is the correct answer, rounded to the nearest tenth. And finally, the last one is a little different in the way it's presented because it's actually on a graph. So if you choose to actually draw the triangle, you could do it this way, for example. Tall, skinny thing, isn't it? If you don't choose to draw the triangle, maybe you just kind of imagined the triangle, or maybe you actually looked at the coordinates and did like we just did a few minutes ago. But since it's on a graph, I'm going to do this. Just 1 block this way. And from here all the way up to here, if you count it up, it's 8 blocks this way. And so when I do my a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I have 1 squared plus 8 squared. And so 1 plus my 64 So c squared equals 65. I can add it up now. And time to do the square root. And notice this one says to round to the nearest hundredth. That's 2 decimal places this time. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the square root of the 65. Whoops, type it in right, 65. And if you can see my calculator screen, again, big old decimal going all the way across. I'll write out some of it over here, 8.06225 hundredth. That's 2 decimal places. So there's my second decimal place, number 1, number 2. I take a peek next door, that's going to stay a 6. Because again, the rule is if the next number is a 5 or greater, it's going to go up. That's not true, so it stays. So 8.06. Hopefully that helps. If you had any questions, see me if you have anything else.